Your typical British supermarket in 19E netty sat on the edge of town or in a retail park, usually built within the last decade or so. The car park stretched out in front with space for maybe 400 cars marked in white lines on black tarmac. Most stores had petrol stations by this point, off to one side with 4 or 6 pumps under a canopy. Metal trolley bays dotted the car park where people returned their trolleys after loading up. The store itself was a large rectangular box, around 40,000 square feet of selling space, with big glass windows across the front and the supermarket's name in large letters along the fascia. Sainsbury's used their orange and brown, Tesco had red and blue. Each chain made sure you knew which store you were at. Some landscaping around the edges tried to soften all that tarmac and concrete. Walking through those metal turnstiles at the entrance is where your shopping trip officially starts. They're counting you as you enter, tracking foot traffic for the store's systems. Right after that, you'll hit the trolley bay, and this is where the psychology begins. Modern supermarket trolleys are absolutely massive compared to the original 1937 folding basket carrier. You're looking at 60 to 240 litres of capacity these days, depending on the store. The bigger the trolley, the more your brain wants to fill it. Empty space practically begs to be used. Supermarkets have worked this out and steadily increased trolley sizes over the decades. You'll often find larger trolleys positioned right at the front, while smaller baskets sit tucked away to the side. Grab that handle and you're in. The game's already begun. The produce section in a 1940s grocer was nothing like today's colourful displays. You walked in and saw rough wooden crates filled with unwashed vegetables straight from the ground. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, spring greens, cabbages, onions. It was all seasonal and almost entirely British grown because imports were scarce during and after the war. The shop felt cold and draughty with the door permanently open for the queue of women outside. Dust, probably dried soil, covered most surfaces and gave everything a grimy look. Women in green overalls worked the balance scales at speed, scooping whatever vegetable you wanted into one pan, weighing it against heavy brass weights, then tipping it all into brown paper bags. There were no plastic packages, no pre-washed salads, no year-round strawberries. If you wanted peas or runner beans outside their short summer season, you bought them tinned. The whole setup was functional, dirty, and utterly seasonal. The bakery section was usually near the back or along one side, and you could smell it before you saw it. Most stores had a proper in-house bakery that baked throughout the day, so there was always fresh bread coming out. The main offering was sliced white bread in plastic bags, the kind that stayed soft for days because of all the additives they put in. You'd also find crusty bloomers and batch loaves, some still warm if you timed it right. There were basic cakes too. Nothing fancy, mostly Victoria sponges, Battenberg and Swiss rolls in plastic packaging. The iced cakes were simple, usually just butter icing in pink or white with a cherry on top. Some stores did jam donuts or iced buns, always displayed on metal trays behind the glass counter. Everything was quite uniform, really, made to the same formula day after day. There weren't 15 types of sourdough or specialty rye loaves like you see now, just standard bread that did the job. The meat section had 2 parts. First was the fresh counter where butchers worked behind a glass screen. They wore white coats and could cut meat to order if you asked. You'd point at what you wanted and they'd wrap it in white paper. Most people, though, just grabbed what they needed from the refrigerated shelves nearby. Here, meat came pre-packaged on white polystyrene trays wrapped in cling film. Common cuts were mince, chops, lamb cutlets, stewing steak and chicken pieces. Beef joints for Sunday roasts were popular, pork chops and bacon were standards. The fish counter worked the same way with fresh fish on ice behind glass and pre-packaged fillets in the refrigerated section. Cod, haddock and plaice were the usual options alongside prawns and sometimes salmon. The dairy section was a fraction of what you'd find today, just a small refrigerated case against one wall. Milk came in glass bottles, mostly quarts and pints, with little cardboard caps that popped up like hats when the milk froze in winter. You paid a deposit on each bottle and brought the empties back, which meant every trip involved juggling clinking glass. Butter came in solid blocks wrapped in greaseproof paper, not the convenient tubs we have now. The cheese selection was minimal. cheddar, perhaps a bit of Swiss if you were lucky, nothing exotic. Eggs sat in cardboard cartons, a dozen per box, and you'd check each one because a cracked egg was your problem. The whole section might have been smaller than a single modern yogurt display. There were no flavored milks except chocolate, no yogurt varieties, no cream cheese spreads, just the basics families needed each week. The tinned goods aisle formed the backbone of British shopping from 1940 onwards. Rows upon rows of identical cans stacked to eye level, each sealed with that clever double-seam process perfected in 1904. Baked beans ruled supreme, bought by millions each week, but you also found tinned peas, carrots, tomatoes, and soups of every type. Canned meats like spam and corned beef became absolute household staples during the war, especially after points rationing turned each tin into a small treasure. The real bargain was a large tin of American sausage meat costing 16 points, your entire monthly allowance, but it came with nearly half a pound of precious cooking fat along with the meat. Tinned salmon, pilchards, sardines, condensed milk, fruit salad, and peaches all lined the shelves when supplies allowed. British families depended on these tins completely. Most households kept at least 10 cans in the cupboard at any time, and in Birmingham people consumed 58 tins per 100 residents every single day. By the late 80s, the freezer aisle had become the busiest part of any supermarket. Chest freezers sat in garages across Britain, packed with bird's eye fish fingers, McCain oven chips, and frozen peas. Findus crispy pancakes were the weeknight hero, those bizarre crescent-shaped things filled with minced beef or chicken and mushroom that went crispy in the oven or soggy in the microwave depending on your luck. Ready meals had evolved beyond basic curries. You could buy frozen quiche, chicken Kiev, or beef bourguignon if you fancied something posh. The microwave boom made it easier, pop a meal in. Dinner was served 8 minutes later. Working parents loved the convenience, and retailers like Iceland built entire empires around frozen goods. Fresh veg seemed old-fashioned when you could grab a bag from the freezer. The cereal aisle in 1990, Britain was pure mayhem, every box fighting for your attention. You had the dull staples like cornflakes and Weetabix, those wheat biscuits that dissolved into brown slop when milk touched them. Then the stuff kids actually wanted. Cocoa Pops turned your milk chocolate, leaving a sweet drink at the end. Frosties had Tony the Tiger everywhere. Sugar-frosted flakes that went soggy in under a minute. Sugar Puffs came with the massive honey monster on the box, honey-coated puffs that were basically sweets pretending to be breakfast. Golden nuggets looked like tiny rocks and tasted artificially honey-sweet. Ready, Breck was hot oat porridge for cold mornings, supposedly giving you that warming glow from the telly adverts. Shreddies were the knitted wheat squares, what your parents picked when they wanted something remotely healthy. Most boxes had toys or competitions inside to sweeten the deal. Walking down the hot beverage aisle in any British supermarket, you'd immediately notice the massive shelf space dedicated to tea. PG Tips, Tetley, Yorkshire Tea, and Twinings dominate entire sections, each offering varieties from standard builder's brew to Earl Grey to fruit infusions. The boxes are stacked high, often on promotional deals like 3 for £5. This is what centuries of tea culture looks like in retail form. Next to the tea sits instant coffee, historically the norm in British homes. Jars of Nescafe Gold Blend and Kenko line the shelves alongside own-brand granules, positioned as everyday essentials rather than anything special. The fresh coffee section traditionally occupied far less space, though that's changing as coffee pods gain popularity. The layout tells you everything. Tea still commands shelf presence and national identity, even if coffee's catching up in actual consumption. The biscuit aisle was where you found the British classics. McVitie's digestives sat on the shelves in their familiar red packaging, plain or chocolate-coated, designed for dunking in tea. Custard creams were there too, those vanilla sandwich biscuits with the ornate pattern pressed into each side. Rich tea was the plain option, light and crisp, perfect for elderly relatives who found anything else too heavy. You'd find bourbon creams, the chocolate version, and maybe some ginger nuts if you were lucky. The crisp selection was far more limited than what you see today. Ready, salted, salt and vinegar, cheese and onion that was basically your lot. Walkers dominated the shelves even back then. Prawn cocktail existed, but was considered a bit adventurous. You wouldn't find Thai sweet chili or flame-grilled steak flavors. Those came much later. Up until the 1970s, if you wanted something foreign in a British supermarket, you went to one aisle, often just a few shelves in a corner. This was the international section, though some stores called it specialty foods. What you found was pretty basic: dried pasta, maybe some tinned tomatoes if you were lucky, a bottle of soy sauce, curry powder in a small tin, olive oil, which most people still thought greasy and bitter. You might find canned water chestnuts or bamboo shoots, perhaps jarred gherkins. That was about it. The selection stayed minimal because demand stayed minimal. Most British shoppers walked straight past without a glance. Foreign ingredients were for adventurous cooks or immigrants hunting for a taste of home. Everything sat there gathering dust, month after month, waiting for someone curious enough to try it. The confectionery aisle in 19 was dominated by bars that had been around for decades. Cadbury owned a good chunk of shelf space with Whisper, Double Decker, and Fudge. Mars bars in their black wrappers with red lettering were everywhere. Roundtree's products like Kit Kat and Aero were still going strong, even though Nestlé had bought the company in 1998. You'd find Twix with its biscuit base and caramel, Toblerone with its triangular chunks, and Drifter, which was basically a wafer covered in caramel and chocolate. If a new bar appeared, it was usually just an existing product with a twist, like mint flavoring or white chocolate instead of milk chocolate. Nobody was inventing genuinely new concepts. The drinks aisle in an 80s supermarket was a riot of colour and fizz. Squash, Robinsons, Ribena, Vimto lined the shelves in glass or plastic bottles, waiting to be diluted at home with water from the tap. Fizzy drinks still came predominantly in glass bottles with crown caps. The same heavy returnable bottles your parents might have grown up with. You'd find Coke, Pepsi, Tango with its punchy orange brightness, and regional favourites like Urn Brew up in Scotland. But plastic was creeping in fast. 2-litre PET bottles appeared through the decade, lighter and unbreakable, offering more drink for less money. By the mid-80s, some brands even tried 3-litre giants, though they were awkward to store and went flat quickly once opened. Cans were also gaining ground, convenient for lunchboxes and school trips. The shift from glass to plastic and metal mirrored a broader change. Portability and convenience were starting to matter more than tradition. The alcohol section was dominated by beer, which was what most British people drank anyway. You'd find the popular lagers like Carlsberg, Heineken, Skoal, and Harp in cans or bottles, along with traditional bitters like Watney's Red Barrel and Double Diamond if you were lucky. Wine was there, but it was a smaller selection. Mostly basic French stuff like Livramilch, Blue Nun, and Black Tower, some Mateus Rosé in those distinctive bottles, and perhaps a cheap Chianti or Bordeaux. The spirits were straightforward: standard bottles of Hague whiskey, Gordon's gin, Smirnoff vodka, and Bacardi rum lined up on shelves. Working-class men stuck to beer and spirits, while wine was seen as a bit posher or something for special occasions. The whole section reflected British drinking habits quite clearly: beer first, spirits second, wine trailing a distant third. The household goods aisle in 1990 was a pretty straightforward affair. Washing powder came in those hefty cardboard boxes that would get all soggy if you stored them under the sink. Brands like Persil or Ariel, all traditional powders, nothing concentrated or in liquid form yet. For cleaning, you had maybe 4 or 5 spray bottles to choose from: a basic multi-purpose cleaner, something for bathrooms, perhaps one for windows. That was your lot. No specialized formulas for different surface types or materials. Toilet paper came in simple plastic-wrapped packs, 4 or 8 rolls, nothing fancy about quilting. You'd grab a bottle of bleach, some scouring powder like Ajax or Vim for the bath, and you were done. The whole section took up maybe 3 or 4 shelves. Quick in, quick out, job sorted. The baby and pet food section sits together because both require consistent shopping patterns. You're back for more every week. Baby formula comes in powder tins and ready-to-feed bottles. Brands like Aptamil and Cow & Gates stocked in multiple stages from newborn through to 12 months. Next to those, you'll find nappies in bulk packs, sized by weight from newborn through to toddler. Weaning pouches fill another shelf, those squeezable fruit purees for babies starting solids around 6 months. On the opposite side, pet food takes up equal space. Tin dog and cat food fill several meters of shelving with brands like Pedigree, Whiskers, and Felix covering everything from puppy to senior varieties. Dry food comes in large bags on the bottom shelf. Kitten and puppy foods get their own subsection with higher protein for growth. The setup makes sense. Families with infants often have pets, so you grab both in one pass. The health and beauty section in an 1800s general store occupied maybe one shelf. You had a few bars of hard soap, lye-based and harsh on the skin. Tooth powder came in small tins, made from crushed charcoal, chalk, or baking soda. For scent, you might find cologne water or lavender oil, if anything. The medicine section was equally sparse, limited to castor oil, laudanum for pain, camphor, and some patent medicines with wild claims printed on the bottles. Cosmetics barely existed in respectable shops since makeup was considered immoral in most communities. If you needed rouge or face powder, you made it yourself or bought it secretly from an apothecary. Compare this to today's drugstore aisles stretching dozens of meters with hundreds of specialized products, and you see how minimal personal care was back then. The magazine rack near the checkout was prime real estate. TV guides and newspapers lined up in neat rows, all competing for your attention whilst you queued. Publishers' new magazine buying was mostly impulse-driven. You'd spot something interesting and grab it whilst waiting to pay. The Radio Times sat alongside tabloids and women's weeklies, each one designed to catch your eye. Then, in November 1994, national lottery terminals appeared, almost overnight. 10,000 shops had these machines installed right beside the tills. Suddenly, you could buy a lottery ticket for £2 alongside your magazine and newspaper. The lottery became another impulse purchase made with your loose change. People came in for milk, then walked out clutching a lottery ticket. The checkout area transformed into a decision zone where casual spending happened fast. The checkout in a supermarket before the 1990s was a slower affair. You'd load your shopping onto the conveyor belt and watch the cashier pick up each item and tap the price into the till with mental arithmetic. Barcodes didn't arrive until 1974 and took years to spread. If you bought loose fruit or veg, the cashier had to remember codes for watermelon versus honeydew or different apple types. Paying meant either cash or writing out a check longhand with the amount in words and figures, then having your signature matched against a check guarantee card for £50 or £100. It all took ages, especially if someone ahead was fumbling with their checkbook. You packed your own bags at the end or grabbed cardboard boxes some shops kept by the door.